Hello, welcome. Thank you for being here. I was just saying, I almost don't want to do an introduction for the man who needs no introduction. So I'll just say, welcome back.
Thank you.
To Warner Taylor, who, you know, the story, a retired bishop from the Diocese of Western North Carolina, a bishop with us in the Diocese of Virginia for a while. And during that time, Porter became a lovely friend of St. Aidan's, which has just been sweet and great. And it's been lovely that you could come and talk to us and come and tell us about this memoir that you've written. So that's all I'm going to say is welcome, and
Thank you.
Can't wait.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you all for coming, both in Zoom world and this world. So I'll talk a little bit and I'll read a little bit, and then we'll have questions, answers. You can tell me this book already changed your life before you even read it, whatever. So just to tell you, the book took me over 8 years to write. Part of that is because I was busy. Part of that was because I had to actually figure out how to be honest about my life. And part of that was because I would never have written this book except that I took a course at UNC Asheville, a writing course, and we wrote about 60 pages a semester. So, and I did that. I actually took this course for like 4 or 5 years. So you just do the math, and that's a lot of pages. Thank God I didn't put them all in one book. So there's an old phrase that says, we live our lives forward and we understand them backwards. That's certainly how this book came about. And this book is a way of my understanding how God has been working, is working in my life, and what were the difficult parts and what were the gifts, were the grace points about that. So a lot of the book is about being the Bishop of Western North Carolina, hence in and out of being a bishop, although you're a bishop until you die. So I wrote it because I wanted to actually discover what was going on with me. It's like Alice in Wonderland. How do I know what I think until I see what I say? So I wanted to discover that. And I think there's always sort of a inner task and an outer task. And that inner task was, as I wrote, I rediscovered a lot of things about the past that I had put away, that I had forgotten. I would say that being a bishop, I also wanted to convey to folks that it's just a little more complex than it may seem. I think bishops are the mayor, they're the police, they're the garbage collector, they're the therapist, they're the fundraiser, they're liturgical police, they're the counselor, and on and on and on. And so the question for me was to discover, with all of those things that you are called to do, what is it you're actually going to do? And how are you going to deal with the fact that there's so many things that you just can't do? What do you let go of? What do you hold on to? I would say that some people who have read this have said, it seems pretty negative. And I hope that doesn't come across. It was very hard. There were some very hard places about being the Bishop of Western North Carolina for 12 years. But I had wonderful staff. I got to meet amazing people. I got to be this far away from the Queen of England, which was pretty cool. She didn't exactly notice me, but I was still this far away from her. I traveled all over the United States, and outside the United States, I traveled to India, to Ecuador, to Scotland, to England, to Ireland, to Puerto Rico, to Taiwan. And within the United States, I traveled all over the borders of the United States. I got to be part of the General Convention that voted for Gene Robinson as the first openly gay bishop. I was there to vote for Catherine Jefferts Schori and Michael Curry, first woman and the first African American presiding bishops. I got to have lunch at Lambeth Palace with Rowan Williams. And I got to work for wonderful people in Western North Carolina. But here's the thing. For years, we just moved, so we changed refrigerators. But for years, I had on my refrigerator this quotation from Saint Teresa of Avila. And this is what she says. You have one life to live, which is short and must be lived by you alone. And there is one glory, which is eternal. If you think upon these things, there'll be many things about which you care nothing. If you think upon these things, there'll be many things about which you care nothing. I began to realize that my life was short. And despite all the privileges of and the good things, the adventures of being a bishop, at some point, what Merton calls your true self just no longer fit that. I became a role, and I sort of lost sight of why I was going through that. I wondered if this was really what I was called to do. I remember when I was a postulant for holy orders, I went before the Commission on Ministry at the Diocese of Tennessee, and I had no idea what I was going to say. I had no idea what they were going to ask, and out of the blue, someone said, why is it you want to be a priest? And I didn't really think about this. I just blurted out, I think it would make God happy. And she looked at me like, who is this? But I think that's true. And I think that God delights in when we use our gifts. I think God delights in when we become who we are, and our vocation and the activities that we're called to do connect. And I no longer wanted to be the Bishop of Western North Carolina because that connection was no longer there. I felt like I was going through the motions in some sense. I don't have any regrets. I learned a lot about the church. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about the Holy Spirit. I learned a lot about other people. But there got to be a point where there wasn't a congruent sense of this is what you are doing and this is who you really are. And therefore, I felt like I just had to resign. And I want to say, so this is, unless you're sort of a geeky Episcopalian, you may not remember this, but there's a question in the ordination service for the bishop that asks, are you persuaded you are called to this office? And when I came before the bishops during that service, I said yes, but at a certain point I was no longer persuaded. And therefore, for the goodness of my own soul, as well as the goodness of the Diocese of Western North Carolina, I decided that I had to go in a different direction. I wanted to teach more. I wanted to go back to being a spiritual director. I wanted to really, there were so many things about being a bishop that I love to do, and there was this many things that I just could not do. And I finally had to deal with that. I want to say I have a huge respect for my brother and sister bishops, especially those who have had a longevity in that office. I have a huge respect for them, but it was not my calling to keep doing that. So there's no talk that is very good without a poem. So here's the poem. And this is a poem you all know anyway. You could say it along with, but that would be sort of chaotic. So Mary Oliver. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began. Though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles, "Mend my life," each one cried. But you didn't stop You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its still fingers and the very foundations through their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough and a wild night and the road full of fallen branches and stones, but little by little, as you left their voice behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds. And there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. I wouldn't say that resigning as the Bishop of West North Carolina saved my life, but I would say that it opened a door to rediscover who I truly am. And I do think that if I had stayed in that office, part of me would have diminished. So I felt like this was what I needed to do. It's not what everyone needs to do, but it's what I needed to do. Because my life has never been a straight line, but it is kind of a circle. When I resigned as the bishop through God's grace and just an incredible, wonderful coincidence of things, someone at Trinity Church in Asheville came to me and said, I know what you need to do with your life. And I was like, thank you, Jesus. I've been trying to figure this out. So he said, you need to talk to Gail O'Day at Wake Forest Divinity School. And as a matter of fact, she's going to be in town next weekend. So I called Dean O'Day and I said, I've heard we need to talk. And so we had coffee and she said, I want you to come teach at Wake Forest. And I was like, so when do I interview? Do I have to present? She said, no, you just come. We're going to start an Episcopal program. And so just like that, I ended up back where I started, because before I was ordained, I was a professor of American literature. You know, I think if you get anything from this book, I do hope it's those lines from Saint Teresa. We realize that our lives are short and must be lived by us alone. And therefore, let us let go of the things that we have to care less about and remember why we're here, remember who we are, and take the next step towards that. I'll just tell you that Wake Forest lasted for a couple of years, and then COVID came. And so I've been doing a lot of online teaching and finishing this book. So I don't really know what the next chapter is. I'm waiting for the Holy Spirit to show up for that. So I'm going to read a little bit and then we'll have a conversation. Okay? Well, you're not going to say no, right? What I tried to do was to have a thread of my own growth, my own recollection, my own revelations, but I also wanted to give key events of what happened when I was the active bishop of West North Carolina. And some of those events, as I said, when I was a priest, I was at the convention that affirmed Gene Robinson's election. That was interesting. As a bishop, I was blessed to be there for Catherine Jefferts Schori's election and for Michael Curry's election. And I was also blessed to be at the Lambeth Conference, even though that was incredibly hard. So I tried to put those events in, and my hope was there were these events that occurred, but there was a thread about this is what was going on with my inner life. So I have to, and I just admit I was at St. Michael's this morning. I sort of choked up in the middle of this, so I'm going to man up this time. So this is Catherine, when we were electing the new presiding bishop, Bishop Catherine was on the ballot. After ballot number 4, one of the bishops whispered to me as we were finished voting, quote, "You won't believe this, but the arch conservatives are going to vote for Catherine," end quote. I grabbed his arm. "It can't be true. Why would they do such a thing? They hate her, and they don't even believe in the ordination of women to the priesthood because they think it will sink the church and then they can mop up." "Well," I said, "how do you know this?" "Because," he said, "one of them showed me his ballot." I was reeling. As a bishop, I was privileged to meet people I never would have otherwise met: Richard Rodriguez, Elizabeth Von Trapp, Miroslav Volf, Desmond Tutu. Had opportunities to go to places: London, Ecuador, San Francisco, the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, New York. But my naivete was gone. Martin Luther said the church is the queen of heaven and the whore of Babylon. But I couldn't stomach any more Babylon. If I was going to represent an institution, I needed to believe in it. It was okay to disagree, but to lie, to do mischief? I remember that a year ago at a bishop's meeting, one of the conservative bishops did not tell the truth about his travels overseas. He and some other bishops were playing on a chessboard I didn't even know about. I couldn't follow their moves. They wouldn't ordain women, but they vote for a woman to head our church. Thankfully, so I was one of the counters. Thankfully, the task of counting cut my reverie short. The chancellor made us count the ballot number 4 twice. Catherine, 88. Henry Parsley, 79. You needed 95 to win. Neil Alexander was down to 12. When Frank Griswold, sitting at the table at the front of the church, read the results, a buzz erupted. 7 votes short. I heard the bishop in front of me say to everyone and no one, "Folks, do the math and you'll know what to do." The bishops were quieter during the 5th vote. When we counters gathered in the room, Ken Price, one of the assistants for the presiding bishop, said, "If there's a winner, we're going to count these ballots 3 times. I read the names slower than before. That was my job, to pick up the ballot and read the names. Our routine somehow took a formality that was not there before. Ambrose Gums, Bishop of Virgin Islands. Ambrose Gums smoothed the ballots as if they were artifacts. The presiding bishop's chancellor stood behind Nettie and Jim Mathis to count their talent, to check their tallies. When the stack was almost done, I heard Nettie, that's Nettie Rivera. I heard Nettie suck in air. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. Ken Price said, "Is there an election?" in a kind of sergeant at arms voice. Jim Mathis said, "Catherine Jefferts Shorius has the required 95 votes. We have an election." Whoa, that's what I heard myself say. And I said it again louder. Whoa! Nettie was shaking. Nettie was shaking. Tears ran down her face. We all looked at one another as we've discovered an ocean or a new continent. I came to General Convention because as a bishop I had to. But to my astonishment, we made history. The only part of the Anglican Communion with a woman in charge. Catherine won with 95 votes, not a vote extra. Henry Parsley got 82, 13 believers short. Ken Price said, Bishop Taylor bishop's table and handed him the result sheet. His voice grew lower and louder. None of you are to make any demonstrations or indication in any way. Is that clear? We nodded like school children. Let's just stare at the floor as we walk into the room, I said. It'll be better. As we stood, I grabbed Nettie's hand and squeezed it. I said, it will be better. As we stood, I'm sorry, I messed that up. As we stood, I grabbed Nettie's hand and squeezed it. I still couldn't do better than just say, whoa. As we walked down the stairs, I realized I felt hopeful about the church as an institution for the first time in at least a year. I had grown jaded and weary of the maneuvering over who could gain the Archbishop of Canterbury's favor, or which dioceses were withholding money from the national church. I was tired of arguing and spending days and weeks in windowless banquet room halls to vote on things that would not change anything except inflate more egos. I hated representing a country club male church. My son was dating a seminarian in New York. When I would visit, she'd ask, are we going to get rid of having to call God a man this year? Don't give up hope, I'd say to her, but in some sense I had. The church machine had just ground me down. I came back to church at 29 because I felt a connection to a source, a power. Something opened me up when I stood around the altar at 6:30 on a Friday morning and ate the bread of heaven. I wept because I didn't know how dead I was inside until I came alive. But being a bishop was taking away that life force because every piece of paper I touched was not about the radical grace of God, but about the church machine. I had lost a sense of horizon. Here I was, 56, thinking about my pension and what I could do and when I could do what I wanted to do, preach and pray and teach and pastor. I wanted to discover the holy with people who wanted to go deeper into things that mattered, like wonder and pain and birth and death. Catherine's election made my pulse race and my heart pound and my throat choke up. When we walked into the church, the crowd quieted and the bishops in the aisles hurried to their seats. I walked to where the presiding bishop sat and held the paper as if it were the Magna Carta. I leaned over and said in a hushed voice just loud enough for him to hear, there is an election. I thought, this is really the presiding bishop's moment, not mine. Bishop Griswold sat up straighter and said in a voice lower than usual, there is an election. Let me remind the bishops that there is to be no cheering, which is so frank. We thank those who offered themselves for the election for their willingness to serve and be vulnerable in such a public way. I lost Nettie, but found a seat next to the Bishop of Indianapolis. She and I became friends because we were both yellow dog Democrats. Her blonde hair gave her a kind of Meryl Streep look. Frank Griswold read the results in ascending order. No one was in double digits until he got to Henry. Henry Parsley, 82 votes. He paused. 95 votes are required for an election. Catherine Jeffer Shorey, 95 votes. There was a quiet moment when the world stopped turning. No movement, no sound, just the pause between the old order and the new. And then the hall erupted. Most of the bishops stood and cheered. Kate Wainick reached to the pew in front of us and grabbed the bishop I don't know where that's come from. The Bishop of Utah, Callie Irish, with a fierce hug. They both wept and laughed at the same time. I looked for Catherine, and I finally spotted her in the middle aisle. Her hands were over her mouth. Tears were streaming down her face. A gravitational force brought the other 11 women bishops to her, and they formed a circle with her in the middle. And they had their arms on each other's shoulders. They jumped up and down like school children. They were laughing and they were crying at the same time. But when I looked in the back of the hall, I could see the conservative bishop wheeling himself out, even though we were told we could not leave the hall. In the back corner, another conservative bishop was talking on his cell phone, even though we were told we could not do that. Then the women scattered for a moment and moved to the front table where Frank Griswold had been seating. And they gave us these books from the cathedral there called Be It Remembered. They had all their books, Be It Remembered, in their hands, and Catherine sat and started signing. And like slow learners, the men bishops queued up. I reached into my tote bag and waited my turn. Catherine Jefferts Shorey, 6/18/06, she wrote. Frank Griswold called us together and by getting the organist to play the Church as One Foundation. He asked Catherine to speak, but she couldn't begin. She opened her mouth and nothing came out. Finally, she said something about being honored, humbled, and the ministry of reconciliation. But the truth is, she could have read the phone book and we would have cheered. We had to wait a long time for the church for the bureaucracy to make everything official. The flood of adrenaline left me spent. When we emerged, there were already reporters outside the church. I took the bus back to the convention hall and walked down the hallway outside the auditorium where the clergy and lay representatives met. From the large hall, all I heard was the word Catherine, and then a thunderous roar. I thought a moment about going in, but I couldn't hold any more. Instead, I walked outside the convention hall through the sparsely populated streets of Columbus. It was a summer day with a slight wind. I found myself at Goodale Park, a short distance from the hall. I walked around the lake. The swans swam in large circles with only the shortest ripple trailing behind them. Across the lake, the children rushed down the slide or moved in rhythm on the swings. I could hear traces of their laughter. The trees rustled. For the first time in a long time, I thought about going back to the diocese and the work, and my step quickened. So I could read and read and read, but you could buy the book and read and read and read. So let me see if you have questions or comments. Mm-hmm. We didn't rehearse this, so.
It's very accessible, so anybody can read it. It's not theological. But I have a comment and a question. you know, I get to the end of this book, and I'm not really sure what this band is going to do with his life. The other question I have is, can you be a priest and a prophet at the same time?
Yeah. Well, you know, Dana, the first question is, I never knew where to stop with this. So I just sort of thought, I'll just stop when I'm no longer the bishop. And I guess I could have put, I hope I write another book, please buy it, you know. I really didn't know exactly. Part of that's because honestly, this book took a long time for me to write. I was blessed to be in a writers group in Asheville. And as I said, we wrote 3 20-page things a semester. And that's how this book came to be. But I had all these chapters that had nothing to do with this. And so a lot of what I was doing was trying to cull out what the stream was. But I thought I'll just stop with this. So that's not a very good answer. And the second one was?
Can you be a priest and a prophet?
Yes. You have to be careful. But of course, I mean, we have many of them. Daniel Berrigan, Thomas Merton. I mean, they're all over the place. I think we have a lot of prophetic voices in the House of Bishops. I think the key about this is to get people to come with you so that you're not just a lone voice. Because it's one thing to get up and make speeches. It's another thing to figure out how to make a difference. And I think it's one of the great opportunities of being a bishop because we do have that voice. But the question really is, I mean, I've heard clergy come to me and say, it's easy for you to go to General Convention and vote for these things, but we have to live with it. No one's going to quit your parish, right? So that's the question is, how do we have a prophetic voice, but also have a teaching voice and a pastoral voice so we can listen to where are the people in the diocese and how can we be open to conversations with everyone? I mean, I know that when I was in Athens, Georgia as a priest, after the election, after the affirmation of Gene Robinson in 2003, we had all kinds of meetings. We had all kinds of deanery meetings. We had meetings with the clergy. Because it was really, how can we bring everyone on board to this? Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I want to push back a little bit on your poem, the sort of idea that you can only live, the only life you can live is your own. And I wonder if the self is a little bit more porous than that. Like you only exist in community, in relation to other people, right? Like, you know, I'm a mom and when my kids are present and far, or my husband or my community, I feel like myself, it's a little bit more of a continuum than a very bright line.
Sure. Yeah. I think, yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I guess I resonated with the poem because at a certain point, if what you are doing is not congruent with who you really are, then you've got a problem. What I would say for your comment is, I'm not going to say anything about my wife because she's right there, but but people that care for you remind you of who you are. And in some cases, challenge you to get into a position where you can be more fully your true self. And in that sense, it really is, as you say, we're all in communion, however we recognize that. And we're incapable of seeing ourselves. We need other people to figure that out. And honestly, I mean, it's not just my wife, Jo, but I had plenty of other people that said, you know, I don't feel as if you're using your talents the way you used to. And it wasn't that I was ineffective, it's that I was always using my non-dominant hand. And I felt after a while that I was losing that ability to really cultivate who I am and how I do things. You know, I mean, you know, one of the things about being a bishop is that, yes, you're a pastor to the clergy, but the clergy got irritated with me because the first time we had a clergy conference, and I was a new bishop, I said to them, I don't want to be a jerk about this, but I'm your pastor, but I'm also the police. So if you tell me things where you have gone against the canons of the church, it's up to me to discipline you. So you just need to know that. And they were like, you don't want to be our friend? You don't want to be our, I said, no, I just want to be real about this. You know, I just want us to be clear that I have a certain responsibility. So that's the thing.
I think you may have just helped me move towards the answer to this. The what I call the political part of the church,
Yeah,
has always been a challenge for me.
Yeah.
And it's bringing that political, I mean, you just gave us a dramatic chapter of your book and the political part. And it's, how do you pull that with the being called part, the loving part? How, I mean, you've just spoken to that, but is there more?
well, anyone with a collar is going to keep more. I mean, well, I think it's about relationships. And I also think it's about, you know, when I was at General Convention 2003 as a priest, this was the last year we did this, and I think it was really horrible that we let go of it. But it used to be that read the book, buy the book, and then you can read this and discover it. We all gathered, before we did anything, we gathered at tables of 10, and it was bishops and deputies, both clergy and lay. And we would, and so you never knew who was going to be at your table. So when I was at 2003, when we had to vote about Gene Robinson's election in New Hampshire, at our table we had one of the bishops of Virginia, we had a woman from South Carolina, we had a woman from Central Florida, we had one of the clergy from one of the churches in Europe. We had this, and it was really wonderful because we weren't trying to convince people, but we were able to talk across, you know. And the woman from Central Florida said, I don't know how I'm going to go back home. So that's a kind of, in my mind, that's what we need to do as the church, is to find a way so that we're carefully listening to one another. And then it goes back to your point about we can be prophetic as long as we are also pastoral. As long as we're not just saying, I know the absolute truth, and if you don't agree with me, you don't love Jesus. No. And I think I have no power about this, but I think it's a great loss that we took that out of General Convention. Because in my mind, it was the most rewarding part. Also wasn't the most rewarding part, but it was extremely helpful. It takes time to do that, and it means the process is longer and messier, but at the end, it's much better.
You pay loving tribute to your wife throughout your book, and I just wondered what impact your wife and daughter have had on your understanding of women's place in religious faith.
Well, yeah, let me think about this. Because, I mean, of course, they've reinforced it, but honestly, one of the things that I hope I'm not going to get divorced over this. I have a twin sister, and when we were just out of college, unknown to each other, we both went to see Bishop Henry, who was the Bishop of Western North Carolina. And he said to me, I have a nickname. I'm not sure I want to tell you what that is, but anyway. Oh, you already spilled the beans. So anyway, I went to see Bishop Henry, and he said, Bam, I've known you all your life, because they live in the same neighborhood. And I'd be real proud to send you to seminary. And I think you go to Virginia. But tell me, where are you going to church? And I went, I'm not going to church. And he said, son, you need to get your life together and find a church and come back to me in about 3 years. So he went to my sister, unknown to me, my sister went in and had a similar conversation about she wanted to be, and he said, we're not ordaining women. But I will send you, because she actually did go to church, I will send you to VTS and you can become a Christian educator. And Sally looked at him and said, I'm going to find a way to get ordained. And so she became a Methodist. And about 15 years later, I said to her, would you like to come home? And she said, I am home. So I think the point about what we need to do is to, Dana, this goes back to your question, is we have to remember that the Holy Spirit is always working. And God's plan for us is always bigger, wider, and deeper than we can imagine. And so what we have to do is to be open to that and to hear voices that we might not have heard about that. And I think and for me, it's, one of the wonderful parts about General Convention, but about just the life in the church is the wonderful parts are when you can actually have face-to-face conversations. And so that you're not just thinking about people in the categories in your head, you're thinking about this person and this person and this person. And I think that radically changes the conversation and gets us out of our ways of categorizing people to think about actual persons. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what comes to me. This is a terrible inflation of my ego when y'all think I actually know things. So
this might not help. I'm thinking of, when I hear your story, it reminds me a bit of Barbara Brown Taylor's writings about leaving parish life and as a priest. And so I wonder then, do you feel your ordained role, but since you've spoken more specifically about being a bishop, was a necessary step in your journey to arriving where you are now.
I have no regrets. I have no regrets at all. It widened my scope of what I thought the church was about. It pushed me out of being a polite but passive person. If y'all know the Enneagram, I'm a number 2. I want to make everyone happy. And becoming a bishop made me realize that's not going to happen. And you can't live a full life if you're dependent upon other people approving of you. You just have to do the right thing, and then the next right thing, and the next right thing, and try to stay in relationship. So I am very grateful for the 12 years that I was a bishop of Western North Carolina, and I feel like it pushed me to grow in ways that I never would have grown. I mean, I would have just quoted poetry for the last 12 years and thought that the world was wonderful. And I think that's the part of it. I have so much admiration for my fellow bishops that have maintained this office for so long, that have been able to make that sacrifice. I just could not do that. I've already forgotten your question now, so I don't know if I've answered it.
I said, well, it sounds like the answer is yes. Do you think being a bishop was a necessary step in your journey?
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. And I think as we say, you're always a bishop, but I'm a resigned bishop. But I think my resignation would also crucial for me still growing into the person that God's called me to be. Yeah. We would have done better if I'd stayed in the pension fund for a little longer, but.
Two related questions. First, in publicity for this event, it stated that you veered away from the church as a young man. Why did you veer away from the church? What made you return?
Okay. This goes back to your question. I veered away from the church because I didn't think it had very much to do with spirituality. When I was in college, I started studying mysticism. I was deeply interested in God. I was deeply committed towards finding a deeper awareness, a deeper relation, a deeper experience of the holy. I didn't think that could happen in the church. Remember, I went to college in 1968, which was kind of a turbulent era. So being part of an institution was not exactly what people were going towards. I was one of those people that was spiritual but not religious before that phrase even come into being. I mean, I was an English major, but I took more religion classes than I did English classes, but I never took a Bible class. It was always Christianity and literature, Christianity and art. You know, it was always that. Because even though my family, we went to the Episcopal Church every Sunday, I just didn't think the church was wide enough and deep enough to address the things that I felt were important. What was the other part of your question? What brought me back to the church? Well, a couple of things. You have to buy the book to get the full story, okay? But I'll make this relatively short. I have a clock right here, so my lovely wife and I were in Atlanta, and I was teaching high school English, and I wanted to study religion without going to seminary. So I found a program at Emory, which was an interdisciplinary program, the ILA, and I was able to work on a PhD between literature and theology. So at Emory, I was taking half my courses in the English department, the other half in the School of Theology. A friend of mine, who was a Catholic nun who was in a similar program, said to me, you know, there's Episcopal Church right up the street from Emory, St. Bartholomew's, and they are starting a shelter for homeless folks. You might think about working there. And I was like, this will be perfect because I can do stuff in the church without having to go to church. It'd be wonderful. So I started doing that. But I signed up for Thursday night. It turned out that every Friday morning at 7 o'clock, they had a Eucharist. So my first night, we stayed up all night. My first night, the other person that was staying up with me said, let's go to church. And I'm sort of done with that. But I sort of got herded into church. And as the priest was going around the circle, when he handed me the bread, I started to weep. And when they came around with the chalice, I wept harder. I had no idea what was going on. And that happened every week after week after week. And finally, the priest was named Woody Bartlett, just a wonderful man. He came up to me and said, sooner or later, you have to talk to me. I said, well, sooner or later I will, but not today. So I started going. The first Sunday I went to church. His assistant preached, and he preached his sermon about, anyway, I don't remember what it was, but it really irritated me. I wrote him a 3-page single-spaced letter about why I was wrong. So the point is that I couldn't get my head back into Christianity. It was all about my heart. And I slowly came back to church. And I think that that my sort of progression has always been in that direction, is that I can think about things, but finally it's my emotional center that really enables me to go deeper. Because I can get caught in my head and think that I've actually sort of figured out the universe. And then, of course, your heart just tells you it's a holy mess, right? And so you might as well walk into the holy mess. I forgot your question, but that's my answer. We're almost done, so unless you're quaking. Well, thank you. It's been an honor to be here, and I will like you even if you don't buy the book.
So do I do that plug for you?
Yeah.
Porter will now be in the narthex where books are available for purchase, and we have snacks and just refreshments for people just because, or if you're here and staying for 5:30 service. So stick around.
Yeah, so they're $20 or $25 on Amazon, $26 on Amazon. And we have a thing, although my wife Jo's going to help me because I'm terrible with anything mechanical. We take credit cards or cash, but no IOUs.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been an honor.